accent.
Yeah.
That's Australian.
Southern
Yeah.
Utah,
Yeah.
England.
England. We're in. Oh,
Uh,
sorry. We're about to get to that.
Ollie, let's start with you.
I'm Holly Allen, and it's my first year in the EIME program. Before that, I was in the public school system teaching English, and goodness, been at Alta. I've been at Granite School District at Kearns and Granite, and I did my internship at Mountain View. Yeah. And that's about it.
Jason?
I'm Jason Wright I grew up in a place called Birmingham in England.
I was in Manchester a couple of years ago.
Before I came here, I lived in a place called Exeter, which is down in the south. I was a teacher of the deaf in England before I came here.
So you do British Sign?
Yeah.
I've got a niece that's deaf.
Oh, excellent. Have a chat.
I have a daughter who's deaf,
Oh, there you go.
so
I
that's
didn't know that.
pretty much all I need to know about me.
No, it isn't.
I teach seminary, I'm a seminary teacher, I teach at Tim Ziedner currently, and I'm in the second year of the program.
And you didn't tell him your name?
Oh, I'm Matthew. Not that he's going to remember all these names
Matthew
anyways.
Wilcox.
Yeah, so.
He already knows that's Holly Allen and Jason Wright and this Matthew Wilcox. He's got that down.
We'll have a test afterwards.
He knows me.
I know her.
Lisa, or Lisa?
I'm sorry, I'm taking notes and recording, and I'm Alyssa Lindstrom. I'm the program manager, secretary, any of those things. So just like to keep things running smoothly as possible.
I'm Shahidisat from Jordan, of the Middle East. This is
As
my...
opposed to Jordan, just a little north of here.
Yeah.
Right. I would have guessed that.
I'm trying to simplify things. This is my first year at the program. I used to work as a consultant for the World Bank in program evaluation and an advisor for the Ministry of Social Development. I'm sorry.
I'm
Sarah
Chapman. I'm
None of us here work for the World Bank besides her.
the UN, you know.
I'm sorry. I tried to be simple.
My name is Sarah Chapman. I'm from DC area, Virginia side. In my second semester here.
Not the Crystal.
I'm a little further out than that, but closer to Dulles Airport.
Okay. I have.
My name is Beth Marshall. I'm from England as well, from the northeast. Have you heard? You've probably ever heard of Middlesbrough. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to travel up there. I was trying to do some genealogy when I went up from Manchester, so I drove quite a ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah. So I'm from just a little town called Yarm, which is near Middlesbrough. And I'm in my first year at the EIME program, and I used to be a primary school teacher.
Carrie, would you introduce
Yes.
who's
I'm
that?
interested to see this.
As most of you know, my former boss Rick retired after 30 years of being the director in the Research and Evaluation Department, and a very long and extensive search brought us Tim Ziedner. Tim has his PhD in educational evaluation from Vanderbilt, and most recently he has been at the Research Information Division of the church as a researcher. So we're kind of swapping places.
She might actually take my physical office.
I might take his office.
Wow.
Nice start. So
Where's Vanderbilt?
It's in
In
Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay.
Tennessee.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
And Tim has a young family, 4 children.
5.
5 children, and the oldest is, and the youngest is just
Almost 2.
almost 2. And right now he commutes from Tooele, so hopefully.
Some of y'all don't know where that is, but it's 70 miles away.
Yes.
The drive even if you're in Salt
So
Lake.
he's hoping to.
Yesterday's commute was interesting.
Oh gosh, I can imagine. But Tim is amazing. He's in the office by 7:30, which means he leaves by 5:30 in the morning sometimes.
Oh no, it only takes me a little more than an hour to get there.
Oh, he speeds.
I live in I don't. It's honest to goodness 75 miles an hour. So
Nobody's on the road at 5:30 in the morning.
fewer people are there. That's true.
And anything else, I'll let Tim take over.
I'm curious what y'all think y'all's plans are post EIME.
While you're talking about that, I'm gonna look for another person who's supposed to be here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
What are you hoping to do with your degrees?
Research.
Okay. And like
Well,
this.
that's
So let me get more specific. So we had a little I don't know, like a seminar kind of thing where professors, yeah, I'm sorry, I'll sit in the middle. I'm sorry, she's I didn't mess up her.
Okay, I don't buy it, Thomas.
No, you're good. We had a seminar and we had people at Vanderbilt that had served in think tanks like RAND or AIR, or you may have heard of some of them. So we had some in there, some in government, including like UNESCO, World Bank, and other pseudo-government or government organizations, and academia. And so they kind of each came in and talked about those arenas as post-doctoral opportunities. And they tried to lay out the benefits, the pros and the cons to each of those. So I went into government right after my doctorate. So I worked at the State Board of Education for Tennessee for about a year, and then moved to the Research Information Division at Church Headquarters, which is kind of like, I would say it's kind of like a think tank. That's probably its closest similarity, except much more application based. Think tanks like RAND and so forth, they do studies on things, but they're oftentimes they're for governmental people like the Congress, congressmen and so forth, that they draw these things up in. And the Research Information Division at Church Headquarters, their clients, we call them our clients, are the leaders of the church. And so they want to know more things about this aspect of the church or what's going on here, and we would do surveys and we would do a lot of focus groups and interviews and collect a lot of existing research, and we would help to inform them about those experiences, whatever they wanted to know. Does that make sense? We don't publish, you don't publish anything from there. You might be working on things on the side. And if you're interested in publishing, publishing is usually along the lines over the vein of wanting to be in academia. So if you're interested in doing those things, then academia is often your call. And there's a lot of other things that recommend academia, including flexibility around your schedule. Although I was always told at Vanderbilt that the great thing about being in academia is that you get to choose your hours. So however you want to move those 70 hours around, you can choose those hours. And you kind of laugh, but the reality is that until tenure, and oftentimes after, it was a, and I don't know what Dr. Subwick's experience was, but
Very similar, but it doesn't end at tenure.
yeah.
Not for you, it does.
So it's like public education.
Yes.
That's about what
But without the
was.
3-month break. and
Don't make me give you a dirty look.
But I'm sorry. Well, I mean, I don't mean that as a break, but like the pressures of publishing are immense. So, or they can be, depending on where you land. Government is very application oriented. Working in a governmental group, the lag times are much shorter than academia. There's a pressure to get something done, right, and reported and so forth. And your clientele, those that you work for, have some of their own idiosyncrasies. How they want to see things. Our clientele in that case not only was the board for the State Board of Education in Tennessee, but it was also the legislature. So we often had to present things to the legislature, and that's always an interesting experience because those people really are from very educated to just charismatic people that got elected and have their own. So that's an interesting experience. The MTC, and I've only been there about a month and a half, almost a month and a half now, is like those things, but even more application based and more immediate. So the work that we do there has a direct impact on the work that, on all the things that are happening there. Does that make sense? There's a call for your research, there's a need for it, and there's a direct application for it. Now, Carrie could say that sometimes the research is heard and sometimes it's less heard, and that's true. But so far, my experience of the places I've been, and I was in academia for a little bit in a postdoc as well. So, and I apologize, I don't want to misrepresent academia, but academia, your impact tends to be diffuse, right? Your publications, it's not clear how much of an impact that actually has beyond the field itself. Does that make sense? There are some things that some researchers do that do have a broader stretch, but I would say generally speaking, academia doesn't have as much application directly as working in government does. And then from government it probably goes to, and think tank is along the lines of those, but in the MTC and the church headquarters, and the MTC even more than RID, because RID we would do a study, the Research Information Division we would do a study, and it would get reported, but it might sit, it's looking for its window of opportunity and timing, and you know, and so it might get revisited 3 or 4 years later, and then that might inform, and you don't know how much of an impact it has. I'll give you one example of research I did. I did about 1.5 years ago. We were asked to study missionary age requirement. And I led a study on the age of mission going, what the history was for us in the church, and what the impacts might be, and what our suggestion would be. That research, I'm pretty positive, informed a decision, along with other things, many, you know, important things, but that research was an important part of a decision that was made to lower the missionary age. Now I'm feeling the impact of that at the MTC, right?
What goes around comes around.
It does. Well served.
Did you want to change your recommendation?
No, and y'all, if you thought about it, could probably imagine some of the blessings that come from, I shouldn't say blessings, I should say opportunities. The potential opportunities that come from a missionary age requirement. I have my own hypotheses, one of which is, so our recommendation, our main recommendation, didn't have to do with lowering the missionary age for elders, but it had to do with sisters. And we weren't even as bold to say 19. We said, 20 or whatever. The reason for that, you can see on campus typically, is it's a horrible time for a sister to go on a mission.
What, 21?
21 is, because it's usually either right at the end of their education. I say horrible for a particular reason. It's horrible if it's horrible on the marriage market, because if you leave during your junior or senior year, or you leave after your senior year, when you come back, it takes a little while to adjust coming back from a mission. I don't know, maybe 6 months, maybe a year.
I can attest to that.
It took me any
I mean,
I was gonna say, I was instantly adjusted.
I was.
not so much the adjustment period, but the horrible time to go on a mission, age-wise. Like, I wasn't quite done with school,
Right.
but I wanted to be.
Yeah.
But that time that I needed to go was 3 semesters before I graduated,
Yeah.
and not sure what I was doing dating-wise. I couldn't make a decision, so I can absolutely
So
testify to that one.
the
but.
consequence of it is that when you come back, and while you're adjusting, most people have an adjustment period, and that adjustment period is mostly intersocial adjustment, and so you run out of time in the marriage market, and what I call a marriage market here, like a prime opportunity to find a mate. So that's one aspect of it, but the other aspect is that you're imbalanced with other people that have gone and come back. So for example, if you were to come back and a young man were to come back and he's had maybe a year of school and you're finished and he's a couple years younger than you, right? So are you going to look, so is your equal that, or is your equal your same age? And anyway, the reality is in the aggregate, it has a large impact.
Can I ask a question about that? Because when it was announced that the missionary aid was going down for men at first, I thought, oh, it's going to go down for women as well. And I was thinking it was going to go down to the same age, but it didn't.
I have no idea why they made the decision that they did.
They said why. In their press conference, they said why. They said we didn't want those boys and girls going out at the exact same age.
Yeah, but it's not clear why. I mean, it's not clear what the reason behind that is, actually. So it's had a big impact on the MTC. And so some of the research that we do at the MTC, that Carrie has done, she can speak more to this, but I can tell you we've had to shorten the time of training at the MTC. And so part of our research is how do you do that? And part of the research is what's the impact of that, right? And in fact, we're just about to start. They're about to lower the time for English-speaking missionaries in the MTC
2 weeks.
to 2 weeks from 3 weeks. And we've been asked to, yesterday, the church leaders.
Keep saying we, you.
I speak we.
She's already packed her bag.
I speak we in the royal sense. We and the mouse in my pocket. I've been asked to, study the impact of that. So that entails a lot of things, like what is the purpose of the MTC? What is it trying to do or not do? And then how do you measure the impact of that? Not just statistically, right? I mean, how do you measure it in a whole slew of ways?
It's very far-reaching, the impact to the cafeteria versus the classrooms versus the teachers versus...
So there's a whole
Develops
organizational research there of the ecosystem of the MTC. But it's also on what the MTC is trying to do, right? And what it's trying to accomplish, and what relationship that has to what happens in the field for a missionary. What's the best thing that the MTC can do? Is it doing that? How are we measuring that? Right? There's a lot of, turns out that when you live at a place full time, and they kind of organize up most of your time, that's a lot of time. Even though it's short 2 weeks, there's a lot of hours in there. And so.
What about language learners? Has theirs been decreased as well?
It has been. In fact, it's already started. The Spanish speaking went from 9 to 6 weeks. Some of the harder languages are around 9 weeks, and they've gone from sometimes 11 weeks or something down to 9 weeks. But we did a study on that. There's a study on the impact of not just the language learning, but other aspects that they're trying to accomplish at the MTC. So, and then there's like I said earlier, what's the relationship of what happened in the MTC to what happens with a missionary, in the field. So, one of my concerns with the job when I was contemplating, when I applied and was contemplating, interviewing and so forth was, well, the scope is quite limited. Right, compared to what I was doing at the Research Information Division, I was over I looked at the whole church. And I looked at a lot of programs in the church and a lot of policies and decisions in the church and did research with members everywhere. That's why when I say I've been there, it's because I traveled a lot for the church. The scope of the MTC is necessarily smaller, but the application is more direct, and the opportunity for research really is as comprehensive. There's so much within it, delving into a spot and then kind of opening up. There's just quite a bit. Always. I have not yet been not busy. I'm very, very busy.
We always...
And I prefer busy over not busy. So that's a little bit of what we do. And Carrie, would you like to share anything in particular, like an example of something that we've done? And I want to get back to the question I asked y'all at the beginning, which was, do you know what your plans are post-doc? Do you have a sense? You said do research, but now I've indicated that's a global answer, not not a particular answer. So I'm curious. And I don't know what the program's agenda is. I can tell you at Vanderbilt, they desired every one of us to be professors and to spread the gospel at Vanderbilt. You know, to make a name and have that reflect on Vanderbilt. And they do that because they pour a lot of money into you, you know. So
We pour a lot of money into these folks.
We spend it as fast as we can.
that's what I tried to do.
But our goal is to turn out talented, qualified people who can do research and represent the university well, but make a difference in practice. But it might be in a public school setting, but it doesn't have to be. Might be in a state office of education, might be in a federal agency, might be in an international context. But that's our goal.
One of your alums actually works for the Research Information Division, Kim
Our star.
Davison. I got to know her for a couple of months. She's fantastic. Kim is great, and has everyone that works there kind of has a different kind of set of abilities, and we try to bring those to bear with the research there. So, and then Carrie will soon be your second alum at RID.
They're so lucky
To have you.
to have Kim and me.
It's a good attitude to have.
But I was thinking this morning about the school and the work context, and it's just been amazing to me how married they are in my experience. I sit in a measurement class and we learn confirmatory factor analysis, and then I go to the MTC and we have this attribute assessment with these latent variables and all these questions that relate to it, and doing a CFA on our Christ-like attribute assessment. And then I go do some interviews and focus groups, and I know how to form research questions and how to turn those into interview questions, and then I go do interviews and focus groups. And then I go to the quasi class and think, oh man, we do a lot of things wrong in the design, and then realize that we have all of these drawbacks and these decisions you have to make. Well, we have to not worry about this because this is more important, and how that informs designing and conducting research at the MTC. It's just been amazing to me how everything in our coursework in our classes the next day or the week after is directly used at the MTC in the application process, and it's just been amazing to me. It's the perfect place also. I never had to go searching of, oh gosh, what am I going to do for this class project? Because I'm sitting in class thinking, oh, I can do this and this and this and this and this, because it's there. It's where the rubber hits the road in everything. Everything that I'm learning in this program is being used immediately in my work at the MTC. And the combination of this program and the application of the MTC is, I think, why I got the job at the RID. I was told that there were over 100 applicants, and they hired 2 of us. And I don't know who the other person is. His name is Brian, coming from out of state, but just so grateful. So grateful. We have the best professors, and the only program like this in the West. So, and then being able to have an opportunity, a job to make a contribution where it is directly applicable is just amazing to me. One study we did recently was a job satisfaction survey. We do job satisfaction surveys. We create learning assessments, doctorate learning assessments. Is that a fire alarm? Oh, okay. We create performance evaluations. We create, latent trait evaluations. We do everything across the board, qualitative, quantitative, etc., etc. But one study that we recently did that I felt has been impactful is we redid the curriculum, I know, which we always do every year, Matthew, and then we evaluated the curriculum, and the administration was concerned about how this has affected the job satisfaction of our teachers. And so did this huge job satisfaction survey with the teachers, asking them everything from the quality of their materials to their training, how happy they are in their schedules, etc., etc., etc. And we have about 800 teachers at that time, actually. I think they've actually had to hire more teachers recently, but that we had about 800 teachers, and I had a sample size of 770. Talk about not the norm, And that's what the MTC is everybody is confined in this little place. And they have a feeling of wanting to contribute and make things better, which makes research so easy. So easy. Who has a sample size of 95? I mean, seriously. And so I did this survey, and out of some of the qualitative questions, there was one issue that kept coming up, is that the curriculum changed from being a very point by point, this is what you need to do during your 3-hour block while you have the missionaries for that class period. Do it how you want to, kind of a thing, to very scripted, 5 minutes you do this, watch this video, ask this question, etc., 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 where every minute was planned out in the 3 hours. It went from that extreme. So something that came out in the data was that teachers didn't feel like they were able to meet the needs of the missionaries because of the script. And it's so ironic, it's because you're teaching the missionaries change everything to meet the needs of the investigator. Yeah. And then teachers don't have the flexibility to be able to do that in their own classroom. So this came out of the data, and we recognized it as an issue. And so when I gave the presentation to the managers who are over the teacher training, they just threw their hands up and said, "Carrie, there's nothing we can do about this. This mandate came from the church office building. And this is how it should be, and I know this is the issue, and I know what we can do, but there's nothing I can do about it." And so I went back to Rick, and I said, "What can we do?" And he said, "Well, let's write a memo to the bigwigs up in the missionary department." And we did, and it was heard. And there are some changes happening now because of that. It's still really stringent in this area and a little bit more flexible in this area, but we were heard. But just an example of the immediacy of the impact and how little changes make big differences as long as people know about it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you find, are you kind of given the reasons as to why they've changed it from one to the other, or do you just have to find out how people feel about it?
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. If we don't, we find out. But this one, we knew that there was a process. I don't know if you've seen the district videos. They're calling it the reality show, the missionary reality show.
They have it on BYU TV.
Yes, BYU on TV. It's so interesting.
They're so great.
But it's their videos that they use at the MTC for training, and they just decided to show them on BYU TV. So we knew, of course, that there was a group of developers at the MTC who were in San Diego, and they were filming these videos as they were following 3 or 4 companionships. So we knew about that. But out of that trip, a lot of observers went down while they were creating these videos, and they weren't happy with how they perceived missionaries' teaching to be. And they weren't happy with the way that they were teaching. They didn't have the teaching skills. So while they were there, they started writing a new curriculum. And the missionary department was heavily involved in that filming of those videos, and that's where it sprang out. So that's where the curriculum sprang out. So we knew what was going on and where it came from. But other times we don't, and we have to go and ask questions and figure out why.
2, 3.
Yeah, I know. I know. Nobody's ever happy with the way missionaries are teaching. In fact, it's something that I wrote up with my old boss Rick, is that this has been since the dawn of time of trying to teach 19-year-old young men to teach other people the gospel, they're not as skilled. But so they keep inventing materials. Oh, this is the golden ticket. Now they're going to be good teachers. And then someone goes out and sees it. Nope, they're not. Let's do something else. Oh, no, there's not. Let's create a supplemental material called the Missionary Guide, which teaches teaching skills. Oh, that didn't work. Let's create Preach My Gospel. Oh, that's a very big step in the right direction. Oh, but we still don't like how they preach. Let's change the curriculum at the MTC. It's the seculars. And my boss just laughs and laughs and laughs because, I'm sorry, Rick, he would say, I just came out of a meeting of something they want to do that they tried to do 10 years ago and it didn't work then, but we'll see if it works this time kind of a thing. But, yes,
Carrie might be suggesting that there's a sense of futility in the work.
This is being recorded, Carrie.
I don't know that that is true. That's true everywhere.
yes,
That is true everywhere.
it's true.
It's just the nature of bureaucracies.
Yeah, and the nature of the students.
And but having
Missionaries.
said that, there's a lot of movement, and there's change. When people change, opportunities change, and experiences. I'll tell you one quick thing. When I was working in the Research Information Division, we were doing a study on information in the church, how information gets up and down the line, how it's used. A lot of the focus was on MLS, the system that we use for tracking all sorts of internal things. A lot of the reason it was it's the member and leadership system. Anyway, so it's where your callings are put in, and how many people are attending. There's these reports. It was mostly created as a form for reporting upline, so they could get a sense of. Whereas when they built it out, they also tried to think, okay, well, we can let the bishops and local leaders use it as well. The reality is that since it was built upline, it wasn't that useful downline. And so when we would interview and talk to people, we get lists, especially from bishops, of what you do outside of system. Right? What are all the things you do? They have these parallel systems going on, right? They're trying to track things, but you couldn't track them in the system. Anyway, there were a number of things, and they, as a result of that and other things that they learned, they're developing all these much more active online dashboards for bishops and other leaders to be able to help them in their service, not just allow them to report things. But one of the big things, I served as a bishop in Nashville, and one of the most difficult things was how many records were in our unit that were not legitimate. They shouldn't have been there, right? They don't live there, or they're incomplete, so we can't even verify if they live there. It's an apartment without an address, and we can't knock doors to find out of the 180 doors there, who's there and where. So there's a process for sending those back, but they often get bumped back. And so that confounds what you're trying to do. If 20% of your records are unknown, they're not really records, then you can't use certain lists that they have for knowing who you might call, or you know what I mean? And also it affects the reports, like the home teaching numbers, how many people are actually being home taught. The denominator is fixed. It's those records in your unit. You don't get to change that. So one of the big things we found from that is there's a real challenge in local units trying to clean their records and to make it a better system. Well, it turns out that they addressed that. From the First Presidency level, they sent something out just in November that addressed that. That was like a hallelujah day for me. And it's something that most people in the church would never know. They would never know. They wouldn't even know that it's important or an impact. You just wouldn't know. But for the people that you interviewed and brought their voice and their experience to the brethren, it'll impact a lot more than people would ever know in terms of ministering and church. So there are success stories, despite what Carrie gave the sense of in the curriculum, lack of success stories.
I was misunderstood.
Yeah.
Did you?
No, just
Yeah.
the sense of spending over and over again and revisiting. There is that aspect to the work, and then there's a lot of positive impact. The closer you are to application, the more you can see the impact of your work clearly. The further away, the more you derive intrinsic value from what you're doing, but less from what you see on the ground. Does that make sense? In the classroom, you have a direct impact, right?
Yeah.
At the State Board of Education, working on curriculum for the state,
I did that too.
so
Less of
an impact, but less clearly borne out for a number of reasons, right? From buy-in to adoption to a whole set of things. So, anyway, so where are y'all planning on doing afterwards? And during? Carrie may give you the sense, and we'll be needing to find somebody, or two, possibly, to work at the MTC. And so part of my reason for being here is to let you know what we do, and not to recruit, because we'll find the right people, but to let people know and what it is we do. So, anyway.
Okay, let's see. My future plans deal with second language acquisition. A master's is in linguistics. Actually worked for the MTC for a while in their as a tutor. But I don't know, I have worked with the State Office of Education, and after doing that I realized I don't want to do that as a job, because I saw how difficult it was for people that I grew pretty close to deal with the legislature. And it's a constant, you're constantly having to defend and justify and show legitimacy to all your hard work. You can work so hard, and then they'll look at you and say, no, we're doing something else, we're going a different direction. And so it's kind of, I don't know if it was that way in Tennessee.
It was.
But,
Anecdotes win, by the way.
yeah.
Somebody's story about their sister that's a teacher, that'll beat out data. So you gotta have your own. You gotta have your own story to go with the data. So I adopted a little crippled girl for my stories. Those have emotional impact. Sell that with your data. You win.
It's true. And I looked at that and I just went, it got so ugly. I thought, no, I'm a little too tender-hearted to deal with that. It would upset me to see my work
What
constantly.
do you think you want to do?
So I think probably academia. I love being in the classroom. I can't imagine not teaching people.
So that's a certain aspect of academia. In fact, it's the least, I can't say this. At BYU, this is not true. At a lot of universities, it is true. It is the least valued aspect of professorship.
Yeah,
By far.
Yeah.
By far.
I think that's why we've been so lucky to
Yes.
have excellent.
This is a teaching university, but it still emphasizes publication, and in fact, in some ways, it's taxing, because they expect you to be great teachers. I mean, more taxing. They expect you to be really good teachers and to be working in publishing. In a lot of places, they expect you to be adequate teachers. You know, that's a secondary role. Here, it's primary role, primary 1A and 1B, staying in your, creditable in your field.
And then right now, I'm just working on some grants with the teaching English as a second language, and the goal that the lady I'm working with has is like 2 publications a year. So I like to write, so that I guess that works out. But
Yeah. Jason?
I'm sort of focusing on behavioural management and how policies impact on the behaviour of children. I've been looking at deaf children mostly in special ed, but I'm looking sort of more rounded, sort of like teenagers, adolescents, and how different programs, not just necessarily in schools, but social programs,
afterwards.
Somewhere in that sort of field,
Yeah.
be researching
Yeah.
in that sort of field. And the idea is to look at policies and
Yeah.
be able to change them and then sort of
Yeah.
influence government and stuff.
Yeah.
Try at least.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
I'll work for the Office of Research and Seminaries and Institutes in Salt Lake.
Matthew is the next Dan Winter.
Okay.
See, Seminaries and Institutes is sponsoring him.
S&I.
What was it called again?
The Office of Research.
So is it the same? No.
Is
We're
Dan
actually
leaving?
enemies. Battles over power. That's kind of the idea is, I think, is that they'll have someone go through this program every couple of years so they don't get one person stuck up there for too long. I shouldn't say stuck.
I did that 35 years ago.
Did you?
And he got out, so.
So there's a success story.
Yeah.
Rick Ott and I both worked at the 50 East North Temple at the same time. He was with the missionary department, I was with
Sounds great,
CES.
great and spacious building.
And that was at the time when they were first forming RID.
Yep.
Yes.
Stan
Stan Weed? I didn't get to hear your name or introduction.
Sorry. I'm Mary McEwen. I'm not in the EIME
Yeah.
program.
She's an IPNT.
That's right.
Yeah.
She's currently teaching many of the students the old language.
My interest is in analytics, and especially the point that you can send out surveys that are self-reporting surveys all you want, and that's what you get back is what they self-report. Where if you have analytics, especially now that there's so much software out there or things over the internet, and you have, the problem isn't that you have lack of data, the problem is that you have a ton of data, and how do you get to the important information in that data. And there are a lot of things in that data that you would never find out through a survey, a self-report survey. And so that's my interest, is doing that. Especially in education, there's a problem because of privacy issues, especially K-12. And so there's not a lot of data out there to do research on because it's just not out there. There's more, but so another interest that I have is simulating the data, so you can say, well, does this pick out what we need from that data, or can we do this and let the teachers immediately see what they wouldn't see if we hadn't analyzed this data for them, you know? So there's the simulation and also visualization, because I think that's easier for teachers to see than just a report of numbers or whatever. So, okay.
There's so much to do.
She's gonna save the world.
Yeah, part of it.
And Jordan.
Definitely I want to go back to Jordan, and I want to focus on application and capacity building. More focus on youth versus education. That's a big problem in Jordan, and that's why I'm studying more evaluation academically, combining with my practice in it. So academia is not really, I'm not, no, but I know it's important to do the application and building capacity. Yeah, so I guess I will be working again with government. God help me in that. Most probably also with the World Bank. Yeah.
That's great.
I don't really know what I'm headed towards. I have probably too many interests, which is the problem. I'm not really interested in academia initially, perhaps later on down the line. But yeah, probably assessment and evaluation, something in that arena.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same as Sarah. I'm not really interested in academia. I'd like to, I'm interested in educational research. I love it to be like part of a think tank. Effective practice. And I'm particularly interested at the moment in teacher well-being.
Teaching well-being.
Teacher well-being.
Teacher well-being. Great. And you, what do you want to do, Dr. Ziedner?
Well, my wife keeps wondering what I'm going to be when I grow up. And professor. I'm going to stay at that for a while to come.
Do y'all have any questions for me, or yes?
You talked about the assessment and the research you do. My question to you is, I know how challenging it is when it is demand driven, but how, in your evaluation of your own work, I mean, how often do you think these reports are put on shelves and not utilized? And what do you do about it when they are not utilized?
So that's a good question. It's a really good question. I think there's a reality to a researcher that's in an application-driven setting that's different than in an academic setting. And that is, you have to know as much about how organizations work and how people work as whatever you're trying to show or persuade or whatever. It's as much about gaining the understanding and the belief and buy-in of your work as it is about the work itself. The interpersonal thing matters a lot. So that's one part. And the other part is a realization that you are just one aspect of the information sources that they have. And appreciating that while you may feel very strongly that the course that you've researched and understood and are offering is the decision that should be made. Oftentimes, and this was particularly true at the Research Information Division and at the MTC, there are a lot of other sources of information. And it is important, so sometimes we would think they ignored it. That may be sometimes. More often than not, I think they take it into account. And it may even be germinating. Like I said, so when I studied organizational kind of theory, you know, there's one of the aspects called a garbage can model. And so what happens is everything kind of gets put in, and solutions are waiting for problems that match up with them in the window of time and receptivity, right? So your research may go unheralded for some time until the right person in the right position with a desire and the right need, suddenly it becomes valuable. Does that make sense? So sometimes it takes patience. Sometimes it takes reminding. Sometimes it takes a voice. And sometimes, and all of the time it takes a realization that yours is just part of the whole thing that they're trying to get information on. And sometimes it's put on the shelf. And I think understanding what's happening is a good thing. Understanding that it was heard and understood, but it's not the right time. And being okay with that. Understanding that you're not being heard. They don't value you, you know. So what is it about me or what we've done or how we've talked about things or experiences that have been, you know, happened in the past that have hurt that, right? And how can I ameliorate that, make that better? So I think it's really complex, and I think that if you get in an application setting, like you'll be in, and you'll be in, and you're in, and you're in, less academia, that you have to be able to look at a lot of things that are going on. One of my things is this, and I know I teased about the disabled child. I shouldn't tease about disabled children. It comes from a real story from the legislature that was presented to the legislature. They had this little disabled girl, and they talked about how important our summers are, to save our summers, to not change the time that you know, when school starts and when it ends. And so around these summer camps, and they had this little summer camp for this little girl, and she's down, and by the end of the week, you know, little Sally. So I mean, it's really evocative. It's a very emotional story, you know. Now, what does the data bear out on it? I don't know. You know, probably not that important, right? but that story, that story wins a lot of hearts, you know, and so it moves the needle for people's decisions. Understanding what makes people buy in or gravitate towards your information is very important. There's a role in qualitative work, not just in trying to understand what we should study and how we should study it, but there's a role of qualitative work for examples of some quantitative driven work that help put a name and a face.
How you tell the story.
Right? It's a story. And people underestimate kind of the power of that for decision makers. So at where we work, it's very mixed method. It's mixed method so we can learn things qualitatively and quantitatively, so they can inform each other, and so that they can hopefully reify each other, right? The quantitative, what we're learning from the quantitative is validated by what we see in the field, and that what we see in the field gives a face and a voice to what this representative sample suggests to us. Does that make sense? I give more of an answer than what you asked, but you have to think about what's going on in the system, not just the research that you're doing, but how to give it.
Also, there's a lot of satisfaction and happiness that comes in the process of doing a good job.
No, that's true.
That you know you did a good work.
As a kind of the boss level, one of my injunctions, I feel, my role is if something didn't, regardless of whether something changed or not, is to communicate to my staff, to those that have worked on something, the value of what they did, and that it was heard, you know, and that it had an impact in this meeting that we talked about. So that's another thing. Many of you will come over the course of your career to have an experience where there are people working for you, you know, with you and for you, and it's really important to communicate the value of what they've done. You know, even if they don't see change, but to give them the motivation, you know, part of the motivation, besides the intrinsic that Carrie alludes to, a lot of times you'll be working over a lot of things and you wonder, you know, does this matter? Like, it matters to me, but does this matter? You know, so I think another aspect is communicating to those you work with, this matters. You know, even if it's not the right time or place or what have you. You were going to ask a question?
We're over time, so we'll.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. It's not-
Really
I
sorry.
want to know your
Ask
question.
your question, Kathy.
The question is, so the name of your program was Educational Evaluation.
It's actually not.
It's not.
No. It was leadership. So the program is leadership leadership policy and organization. Mine was in educational policy and evaluation. So my worldview actually is more around. You probably got to hear that. Is more around policy. Like I'm interested in research, and so my application side of things. Like the reality is, there's a lot of things that are important to research. But if it doesn't provide a lever of something of utility, I'm not interested in that research. And so when I think of the brethren or the arenas in which I work, if people say, well, I'd like to know this, well, part of my first question will be, well, is there anything we can do about that if we know about it, right? Or is this a done deal? I mean, that would be wonderful. It's nice to know, but in an applied setting, you kind of need to know to inform people that have decisions to make. So I'll give you an example really quickly. The church leaders, one of their biggest levers is training, right? They don't get to go in and tell people how to do, you know what I mean? There's not a lot of things, but they can teach people. So there's a question like, how effective is that? What's the shelf life of that? What's the best way to transmit that and get that, you know, if you want that message to get down the road, you know, is it best from you? Is it best from local? You know, so you would think I think in terms of policies when I do my research, so decisions. Any other things? I know we're past time, but I guess we.
Further questions?
Can I ask a quick one? I'm just curious. What kind of crossover or implications does your research have on other missionary training centers around the world? Are they linked at all, or is there?
They're intimately linked.
Yes.
IMTCs, we call international MTCs, are all, the director is on our floor. They
At the MTC,
they-
at the program.
they strive to do the same curriculum, you know, so they get trained on it and everything.
Our assessments are online and translated for them.
Oh, wow.
How about the other programs that are going on, pilot programs in missions? For instance, my son is in Hong Kong. They're doing one with the iPhone right now. Do you?
That is the missionary department.
Okay.
So that's at church headquarters. Now, part of my job, what I think, is to work more. Like, I don't see the disconnect between the MTC and the mission. And I will be working more to have that be an exchange that goes much more fluid back and forth. They just hired somebody that actually oversees both this role and that. He used to work at the MTC, Chris Randall is his name, and so there should be more interplay between what's going on in the field. But RID actually is the research, part of the big research engine for missionary. So they do that, they coordinate even our work in the field.
And more the missionary department is calling upon the MTC to help them gather research.
So, that's your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering how that
Yeah.
went.
Matthew, final question? Anyone else? Well, I think we should give a round of applause. We wish Carrie the best as she defends her dissertation.
And take some comps.
She's sweating already.
She's gonna have a nervous reaction every time anybody says dissertation for like a year.
Itch.